At 7:30 a.m. on April the 17th, 1975, the war in Cambodia was over. It was a unique war, for no country has ever experienced such concentrated bombing. On this, perhaps the most gentle and graceful land in all of Asia, President Nixon and Mr. Kissinger unleashed 100,000 tons of bombs, the equivalent of 5 Hiroshimas. The bombing was their personal decision. Illegally and secretly, they bombed Cambodia, a neutral country, back to the Stone Age. And I mean Stone Age in its literal sense. Shortly after dawn on April the 17th, the bombing stopped and there was silence. Then out of the forest came the victors, the Khmer Rouge, whose power had grown out of all proportion to their numbers. They entered the capital Phnom Penh, a city most of them had never seen. They marched in disciplined Indian file through the long boulevards and the still traffic. They wore black and were mostly teenagers. And people cheered them, nervously, naively. After all, the bombing, the fighting, was over at last. The horror began almost immediately. Phnom Penh, a city of 2.5 million people, was forcibly emptied within hours of their coming, the sick and wounded being dragged from their hospital beds, dying children being carried in plastic bags, the old and crippled being dumped beside the road, and all of them being marched at gunpoint into the countryside and toward a totally new society, the like of which we have never known. The new rulers of Cambodia called 1975 Year Zero, the dawn of an age in which there would be no families, no sentiment, no expressions of love or grief, no medicines, no hospitals, no schools, no books, no learning, no holidays, no music, no song, no post, no money, only work and death. Cambodia. Where is Cambodia, some of you might ask? Unlike Vietnam, its neighbor, Cambodia has been virtually sealed for 4 years, its suffering invisible. In a world of saturation news, there has been no news of what was really done to more than 7 million people, of whom at least 2 million are missing, believed murdered. That's about 1/3 of the entire population. Proportionately, it's Birmingham, Manchester, and London exterminated. For me, coming here has been like stumbling into something I could never imagine. And what follows is the first complete film report by Westerners from the ashes of a gentle land. And I have to say there are scenes which may upset some of you.
This is Phnom Penh, once a modern, bustling city, greater than Amsterdam or Brussels. For 4 years it stood silent, abandoned, as if in the wake of a nuclear war that spared only the buildings. And this is how I remember it. The capital of a land of plenty, of markets everywhere, a land that produced 3 annual harvests, and a variety of fruit renowned in Asia. The Chinese, in search of a superlative, used to say, as rich as Cambodia. One man above all reflected this image, Norodom Sihanouk, self-styled god-king, jazz lover, movie maker, conspirator, demagogue. Sihanouk preserved Cambodia's independence like an absurd juggler in a cockpit of war. In 1970, he was overthrown in the chaos that followed the American bombing. In the spring of 1969, American B-52s had begun the secret bombing of neutral Cambodia. These top-secret military cables, obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, were part of a cover-up that was the real beginning of Watergate. The pilots were sworn not to tell even their superiors, and their logs were falsified. The official aim of the bombing was to wipe out a Viet Cong base in Cambodia, a base that existed only in the imagination of American generals. President Nixon's aim was to show the Vietnamese communists just how tough he could be, a policy he once described as the madman theory of war. The Cambodians who died were called collateral damage, and their burning villages were called friendly fire. The Pentagon had described Cambodians as a docile and passive people who cannot be relied upon to act in a positive way for the benefit of American policies. In 1970, the United States invaded Cambodia. A member of Dr. Kissinger's staff described how the invasion was launched. Nixon had been watching his favorite movie, Patton, whose war heroics seemed to fortify his toughness. Kissinger had been dining out on stories of Nixon's drinking.
Shortly before the invasion, Nixon, who was drunk, spoke to Kissinger on the phone. He slurred, "If this doesn't work, it'll be your ass, Henry." Kissinger had once described Nixon as unfit to be president. He also called him a meatball mind. Between the two of them, they began the destruction of those passive, docile people, thousands of miles away here in Cambodia. Of course, Nixon was later apprehended, not for the murder of Cambodia, but for a domestic affair called Watergate. Kissinger received the Nobel Peace Prize.
Out of the inferno of bombs came Pol Pot, a former Buddhist monk, and the Khmer Rouge, whose revolution had never enjoyed a popular base until Nixon's madman theory of war. The bombing upset the delicate balance of royalists, republicans, and communists. It triggered a war that caused at least 1 million dead and wounded, and tore apart the very fabric of Cambodia.
When I came to Cambodia in 1967, Phnom Penh was the most beautiful city in Southeast Asia. Perhaps it's too easy for a foreigner to romanticize such a place, but to fly across the Mekong River from beleaguered and neurotic Saigon was to reaffirm the belief that if only foreign armies would leave alone these people, they would assert their own civilization and measure their own prosperity.
Certainly there was feudalism and corruption, but there was no war, no slaughter, no napalm, and the Cambodian family was a fortress without want. And now this delicious city is a smoldering wreck of that vision. Gangs of scavengers, mostly children, forage in the empty houses, offices, schools, cinemas, parks, museums. In all but a few places, there is no electricity and no sewerage. The water supply is polluted by the bodies of countless murdered and tortured men, women, and children. And the jungle has reclaimed their homes. This was the National Library. Almost as a symbol, the Khmer Rouge converted it into a pigsty and burned its books and archives. From year zero, all past knowledge was illegal.
And here is one of the more grotesque ironies of it all. The Khmer Rouge banned all forms of money, and yet they had printed millions of these brand new banknotes. And just before the Vietnamese drove into the city last year, the Khmer Rouge blew up the National Bank, and the monsoon rains carried all this money through the city. And today, a city that has nothing is literally running with money, all of it worthless. Monsieur Bummer, as representative of UNICEF, you have seen the situation. here in Cambodia. How many people are threatened by famine, by starvation, do you think?
The government has requested help for 2,250,000 people.
Who are threatened by famine?
Yes.
By hunger?
This is the dimension of the problem. Let me tell you something. On the 18th of July, I did go to Kampong Speu, and I visited the hospital. In one of the very poor barracks with practically nothing, there was already 54 children dying. One of them was sitting in the corner of the room with swollen legs because he was starving. He did not have the strength to look at me or to anybody. He was just waiting to die. 10 days later, 4 of these children were dead. And I will always remember that, saying I did not do anything for these children because we had nothing.
At the beginning of July, the Cambodian government handed a request for 100,000 tons of rice and medical supplies to the International Red Cross and UNICEF. Here in the town of Kampong Speu, these 4 scoops of rice are all that these people will get for 1 month. And this food comes from another impoverished country, Vietnam. Up to the middle of October, the International Red Cross and UNICEF had sent 200 tons of relief, which effectively is nothing. This is Cambodia's human hemorrhage, the road people. Hungry, sick, dislocated, they crowd the roads trying to find their way home to villages, many of which were razed to the ground by the Khmer Rouge. Every family I met had lost at least 6 members, killed or starved.
The Khmer Rouge drew up a constitution for their new democratic Cambodia. Article 20 of the constitution said that any Cambodian had the right to worship according to any religion, and Cambodians had the right not to worship according to any religion. But any religion that was wrong and detrimental to Cambodia was absolutely forbidden. That's what Chairman Mao, whose teachings the Khmer Rouge followed to the most barbaric extremes, might have called a contradiction. Most Cambodians are Buddhists, and Buddhism inspires the gentle, the passive, and venerates harmony with other human beings in their land and not mastery over them. The Khmer Rouge set out to wipe out this tradition almost overnight. They murdered monks and all those found at prayer. They sacked pagodas, and of course they turned the same venom against all other religions. Where I am standing was a magnificent 19th century Roman Catholic cathedral, and this is what is left.
It seems that Pol Pot imagined himself as an heir to the empire of Angkor Wat, whose kings ruled from these temples in the 10th century. In Khmer Rouge ideology, communism was seldom mentioned. Instead, there was the Angkor, or organization, which demanded slavery in an agrarian society without towns or machines. The Chinese backed Pol Pot and his delusions of being another Mao Zedong. They saw Cambodia as a rice bowl and a future colony, as it already appears on some Chinese maps. In this rare Khmer Rouge film, we see people as slaves. Even the word sleep was banned. From year 0, only rest could be used. People lived in barracks without walls. Families were split up. Husbands and wives could meet only once a month. A young boy smiled at me while we worked, a girl told me, and he was killed.
during the rainy season and during the dry season, all days and all night we have to go up about 3 o'clock or
3 o'clock in the morning?
yes, 3 o'clock in the morning and work it until 11 o'clock.
11 at night?
Yeah.
And what kind of food did they give you?
Food, only boiled rices and sometimes with salt.
What happened to your family during the 4 years?
My sister with her husband and 6 children were killed. My brother, my older brother, one younger brother, and 2 brother-in-laws were killed.
And this is where some of them died. A high school that became an Asian Auschwitz. Like the Nazis, the Khmer Rouge photographed their victims when they were brought to the camp and as they were being tortured and hanged, drowned, disemboweled and electrocuted. In this camp alone, 12,000 people died like that.
Article 1975 to 76. He killed every day 10 to 50 men. Every day. 77 to 78. He killed 100 to 150 men a day.
Mr. Peck, what did they do to you here?
He stick to my head.
They hit you on the head?
Head to my head. There's 50 bar of the stick, the wood.
They hit your head 50 times?
50 times.
50
times.
With a piece of wood?
But one piece of wood,
yes.
big like that.
What other things did they do to you?
I ate my hand. My hand, he fixed my hand by the vice, on the vice.
They put this hand in the vice. That's why it's bent.
And then he take a finger to pull out my fingernail.
They pulled your fingernail out with the pliers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And after he put the alcohol on there.
To make it very painful.
Very painful. I forget everything. I don't know my name also. I don't know my name. How's my name? How's my wife?
Yeah.
We don't know anything.
People were mutilated on iron beds and their blood and tufts of hair are still on the floor. Former civil servants, soldiers, teachers, students, actors, technicians. This was a victim photographed as he was found when the Vietnamese discovered the camp. A Gestapo called S-21 tortured and killed all those designated as sub-people. Virtually anybody who'd lived in a town, who had modern skills, who knew foreigners. For example, only one lawyer has been found alive.
Did they also kill women and children here?
Oh, many children. The first time he killed the children, after the wife, and after he.
First they killed the children,
first,
then the wife,
then
the man.
The man.
These are captured Khmer Rouge troops. All of them have taken part in mass murder. Why did they kill these people?
តើហេតុអីបានជាសម្លាប់ប្រជាជនទាំងអស់ហ្នឹង
បានជាពួកពលពតអៀងសេរីបញ្ជាឲ្យសម្លាប់ប្រជាជនទាំងអស់នេះព្រោះគោលបំណងរបស់វាដើម្បីបំបត្តិពូជសាសន៍កម្ពុជា
He said that the Pol Pot Inquiry commanded to kill all these people.
Would you ask them how many people they killed?
តើបងម្នាក់បានសម្លាប់ប្រជាជនអស់ប្រមាណដែរ
ខ្ញុំនៅក្នុងក្រុមក្នុងក្រសួងហ្នឹងគឺសម្លាប់អស់250នាក់
For this group 250
He killed 250?
Yeah.
And the other man?
In his group is 2,500.
How many were there in a group?
មួយក្នុងមួយក្រុមមានប្រមាណអ្នកក្រុមបង
នៅក្នុងក្រុមខ្ញុំហ្នឹងដែលគេបញ្ជាទៅឲ្យសម្លាប់ហ្នឹងគ្នា8នាក់
8 person in the group.
So 8 persons killed 250, 8 persons killed 2,500.
នៅ50នាក់ដែលគេឲ្យបញ្ជាសម្លាប់មនុស្ស
50 person for
50 killed 2,000. Would you ask this man here that he must have thought when he was killing all these people that he was killing fellow human beings, fellow countrymen?
ចាដែលអូនឯងពេលដែលសម្លាប់នឹងហេតុអីក៏អូនឯងមិនគិតថាជាការសម្លាប់មនុស្ស
ថ្ងៃខ្ញុំនៅក្នុងនោះគឺបើខ្ញុំគិតទៅក៏វាសម្លាប់ខ្ញុំដែរពោះពលពតវាបញ្ជាឲ្យសម្លាប់ទាហានចំនួន 2,500 នាក់ទាហានលន់នល់បើខ្ញុំមិនសម្លាប់តាមក្រឹតរបស់វាគឺវាសម្លាប់ខ្ញុំដែរនៅពេលនោះ
He said that if he does not kill these people, the higher command will kill him.
Amongst these thousands of people, were there just simply peasants, women and children, young children?
ក្នុងចំណោមប្រជាជនដែលសម្លាប់នឹងតើជាប្រជាជនជាថាជានារីជាកូនធម្មតាឬក៏ជាអ្នកណាដែរដែលអ្នកសម្លាប់នឹងក្នុងចំណោមប្រជាជនដែលសម្លាប់នេះគឺវាមនុស្សចាស់55ចុះមក most of the people they killed it were from all strata.
The middle class.
Yes, the middle class, the women and children ranges from 1 year up to 50.
Has he children of his own?
Yes.
He has children. His own children.
He has one child.
He has one child.
Yeah.
Is his child alive?
His child is alive.
My wife, my son, my daughter, anything be gone.
They were killed?
They killed. We have only my child, only one.
How many children were killed?
5.
5 children?
5 children. Yeah.
How were they killed?
He don't give to any to eat.
I see, they starved.
2 months anything with anything. No rice, no soup, no anything.
You are one of 8 who survived.
Yeah.
You were here on the day of the liberation.
Yeah.
What did you feel on that day? What were your thoughts on that day of liberation?
Oh, the time of the liberation, all very, for me, personal.
Yeah.
I'm very glad because, after my life, today, and today, we don't know that tonight, perhaps he killed me, or tomorrow he killed me.
Out of 12,000 who died in this extermination camp, these 8 people were found alive. One man is a sculptor, another a painter. They survived because they were put to work making busts and painting godlike pictures of Pol Pot. I shall never forget the 17th of April 1975, said Mr. Prak Sarin, a teacher. I was in my classroom when the Khmer Rouge burst in and told us all to march into the countryside. The children were crying. I asked if they could first go home to join their families. They said no. Most of the little ones died of exhaustion or hunger. I never saw my own family again. Before year 0, there were 990,000 primary school children in Cambodia. Of these, 670,000 are missing.
There are 558 people in this, the main hospital of Phnom Penh, and most of them are children and babies. They are dying because they have virtually nothing of value to eat. No fresh water, no vitamins, no milk. And there are no medicines to speak of, no antibiotics, and not even enough bandages. One little boy's screams can be heard out in the street, rising and falling in agony. He is starving. This morning I was approached by a man from the International Red Cross. He said he was desperate. He asked me if I had a contact in a government, any government, that could supply one Hercules C-130 relief plane. Just one of these big cargo planes carrying transport and drugs and food, he said, would save thousands of lives. But why, I asked, could not the International Red Cross supply one such plane itself? Because, he said, my directors in Geneva are still considering the overall framework of a plan of relief for Cambodia. Look, he said, this is Southeast Asia. There are politics involved, you know. What he meant to say was that the United Nations, Britain included, still recognizes the defeated, murderous regime of the Khmer Rouge. And it's difficult to get official help for a people whose new government still does not diplomatically exist. In other words, 3 million people are beginning to starve to death in Cambodia, and the International Red Cross and the relief agencies and governments are doing virtually nothing because the new leaders of this country have yet to be recognized, to be approved of. Of course, if you're in Geneva or New York or London, you can't hear the screams of the little boy I mentioned.
This is Kun Sok, aged 10. His parents are dead. He was found starving on a rubbish tip. On the day we filmed him, he desperately needed penicillin and milk, of which there was none in this hospital. We came back to see him the next day, and he was dead. During the time of our filming, there were only 2 Western doctors who had come to Cambodia to help.
Doctors, in this hospital, we seem to be surrounded by every problem imaginable. Where do we start?
The big problem here in Cambodia today is the malnutrition of all the populations, and especially of the children.
I mean, how serious is that? Does it affect a majority of the children? Or?
Oh, yes, majority of the...
This little girl, she seems to be in a terrible state.
There are 2 children with advanced malnutrition, a big abdomen and very thin limbs. On sait son âge?
Quel âge?
Quel âge elle a?
Un an.
Quel âge elle a?
Un an.
1 month.
1 year.
1 year. 1 year.
I think it's a terrible problem because this population has been submitted during 4 years to a regime of very poor nutrition and very hard work, and the results are here. The psychological conditions were terrible also. The families were systematically separated. There was no possibility of any health care.
What's wrong with this little boy?
It's a typical malnutrition with also skin disease on the whole of the body.
How old is he?
He is 12 years old.
He's 12?
Mm-hmm.
This little boy is literally skin and bone. How, I mean, what can you do to save him? Can you save him?
Yes, it's possible, but also probably this boy had some other disease, and it's necessary to perform examination with a laboratory and X-ray examination in order to precise this other disease.
Yes.
But all the modern equipment in this hospital was destroyed by the Khmer Rouge, who banned all forms of modern medicine and razed to the ground 30 hospitals and clinics. There were 550 doctors in Cambodia. 48 survived.
There is no Cambodia which is not ill. No Cambodia, with all the degree of disease.
It is actually a real emergency. It's a real emergency to get food and to get drugs, to feed first and to treat all this sick population.
Children and also adults are dying of inadmissible disease for our time. Inadmissible. Here there are millions of people. We are in the same situation of the refugee.
Are you saying that because of the West's attitude towards the boat people refugees, then they are not allowing aid to come through to Cambodia?
Yes. It's in the same way that the cutoff of the expeditions of milk to Vietnam, the lack of assistance to the Cambodians is in the same way. It's clearly here. Yeah.
The European Economic Community has suppressed recently the food assistance to Vietnam.
Yes.
And I think it's the same thing.
An unimaginable situation is that the Vietnamese, which is in a very difficult situation at the alimentations level and at the medical level, give some drugs and some food to this country.
This is a food convoy from Vietnam, Cambodia's only guaranteed lifeline. Vietnam, although itself facing famine after 30 years of war, has sent more than 25,000 tons of food to Cambodia. The Vietnamese have managed to do this by asking every family in their southwestern provinces to give 6 pounds of rice. By contrast, Western governments have sent only a dribble of aid. The major agencies, the International Red Cross and UNICEF, have demanded strings to their proposed charity, such as the right to supply what they call the other side. Western observers who have crossed the Thai border into Cambodia have seen what this means in reality. It means feeding not civilians, not women and children, but supplying what is left of Pol Pot's army of genocide. For this privilege, the agencies have withheld aid from 90% of the Cambodian people. Supplying the Khmer Rouge is in line with the West's diplomatic support for Pol Pot. Last month, the United Nations General Assembly was witness to the extraordinary spectacle of the Western democracies, America and Britain included, voting to continue recognition of a defunct regime, which they themselves acknowledge as the most thorough mass murderers since Hitler. The reason is this: the West does not wish to upset its newest ally and trading partner, China. For China is also Pol Pot's principal backer. One British organisation, Oxfam, has attached no political strings to its aid, and its success in feeding some of the starving is an indictment of all those governments still talking about the global power balance, and all those relief agencies which refuse to move without their caravan of conditions. On October the 15th, Oxfam's Director General, Brian Walker, said in London, "We have had only complete and honourable cooperation from the Cambodian government and the Vietnamese. When I left Cambodia," said Walker, "the total input of Western aid over 9 months amounted to 200 tons of food. I don't see how anyone can be proud of that situation."
These people has anthrax, in French, maladie du charbon.
Yeah. Now, what is anthrax and what does it do?
It's an infectious disease which is due to bacillus of charbon.
And how do you treat it?
By antibiotics,
Prevent it?
such as penicillin.
Penicillin?
Penicillin, yes.
Penicillin will
Yes.
cure it. Is there any penicillin in this hospital?
No, there are some, but not enough.
If people don't get any penicillin at all, how long does it take them to die?
They die in
Presuming they must die.
2 weeks or 1 month.
That really says a lot about the problems of this country. A simple, preventable disease that needs only penicillin.
But this is a disease that you usually never see in Europe. It is a disease
Yes,
which
yes.
touches
Since
only the animals.
1920.
Yes, it's an animal disease. This child, what is she suffering from?
She's suffering from anthrax also.
From anthrax.
Anthrax of the face, yes, and from malnutrition of the first degree.
Why is her face swollen?
Why?
Why?
Yes, because there is
this
an
ulcer?
ulcer.
Consequence
Yes,
of
of
the
course.
anthrax, yes.
So it's difficult for her to eat anyway.
Yes, yes,
Probably,
yes.
yes.
Very difficult, yes.
What will happen to her?
In the lack of treatment, she died in the next week.
The few drugs that have reached the hospital at Kompong Spur simply prolong the agony. Every morning, the Vietnamese doctor must decide who will live a little longer and who will die. The population is traumatized. There is 1 miscarriage for every 3 normal pregnancies, and at least 50% of the women have lost their menstrual cycle completely. These shy people never held out a begging bowl, but such is their agony that this young woman begged us for medicines before she died. These children are the end of a process begun by impeccable politicians who took their decisions at great distance from the results of their savagery. Their style may have differed from Pol Pot's, but the effect was the same. The bombs are like falling rain, wrote a child in 1973, a year in which the tonnage of bombs dropped on Cambodia exceeded by half the entire tonnage dropped on Japan in World War II. The price of a Cambodian life was, incidentally, $100 compensation. William Shawcross, the British author, interviewed Prince Sihanouk last year. Two men, said Sihanouk, are responsible for the tragedy in Cambodia today, Mr. Nixon and Dr. Kissinger. By expanding the war into my country, they killed a lot of Americans and many other people, and they created the Khmer Rouge. The people in the town of Kanlang Sao, on the banks of the Mekong River, have regressed almost to the Stone Age. Before the madman theory of war, and before Pol Pot, this was a place of prosperous farmers, skilled workers, engineers and teachers. All the brick and stone buildings have been destroyed, and people now live under straw and in plywood shanties. There are few adult males left to work the fields, and the rice ration is half a pound per person per month. A young woman describes how 16 members of her family were executed in one day. They were declared to be unproductive, she said. They were killed with pieces of wood and their throats were slit, one by one. My baby was left in the heat to die. My sister-in-law was killed because someone said she was too beautiful. The Vietnamese are condemned for driving out the Khmer Rouge killers. Were the Tanzanians condemned for throwing out the hideous Idi Amin? Of course not. It should be explained why the Vietnamese came here to Cambodia. After 1975, Vietnam was under constant attack by the Khmer Rouge, who massacred Vietnamese border villages and were supported by 10,000 Chinese. An unholy trinity of Pol Pot, China, and America say that Vietnam is an agent of Russia. Anybody who knows the fiercely nationalistic Vietnamese, who have stood virtually alone against invaders for 30 years, knows this to be laughably untrue. But the Chinese threat and the present denial of aid is pushing both Vietnam and Cambodia deeper into the waiting arms of the Soviet Union. Both the Cambodians and the Vietnamese are fighting for their survival as never before. When the Khmer Rouge retreated before the Vietnamese, they blew up many traditional dikes and dams. And to add to the apocalypse, the rains have been unrelenting this year. From the air, the endless landscape of Southeast Asia, the patchwork of paddies and fields, is barely discernible. Nothing moves, as if the great humanity of Asia has stopped at the border. Phnom Penh is dreamlike. Nothing seems to echo from the days of peace. Then you awoke at the Hotel Royal, switched on your radio, and in all probability heard the squeaky drama queen voice of Prince Sihanouk berating you for writing an article about the financial excesses of the royal family. Sundays were a joy, especially the parade down Monivong Avenue, the parasols, the girls with jasmine astride Hondas, the saffron robes, the ice cream barrows, the hustlers, the platoons of well-fed families, the cared-for children. These are the first toys these children have ever seen. At this orphanage, out of a total of 400 children, there are only 22 children aged between 1 and 5. During the years of the Khmer Rouge, few pregnancies ran their course and few babies survived. These children were found in the forest, living off tree bark, grass, and poisonous plants. They are not only orphans, they have lost their identity. Normality at last. The first school in Phnom Penh to reopen. Like the infants with their toys, these children are the lucky ones. They have paper and pencils. Elsewhere, there is none of these things. I remember, said the child. I am 12 years old. What is your name? I asked him. I forget, he replied. You forget? I said. Yes. Where are your parents? I forget. I think they are dead.
Many people are dead, but there are people alive fighting for their survival. We should help them.
How much time have we got to save those 2 million odd people?
This has been requested for the next 6 months.
So we've got 6 months.
Yeah.
If the horrors in this documentary are to have any purpose, it is not just to assault your emotions. It is to end the silence and indifference contrived by governments and relief agencies, and to put Cambodia back on the human map. When the Vietnamese army threw out the Khmer Rouge, they rescued this country, for whatever reason, from slavery and possible extinction. Western governments may not wish to recognize that fact, but nothing is more obvious to the Cambodian people. On the day of liberation, my interpreter, a young girl, was due to be killed. The British government knew all along what Pol Pot and his fanatics were doing to these people. Mr. Callaghan's government presented a report to the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, with information as shocking as anything you have seen tonight. And yet, people here are being allowed to die for want of the simplest things: food, drugs, transport, because governments, including our own, are bent on isolating and punishing the Vietnamese. In other words, saving Cambodia would mean cooperating with Vietnam. Both the Cambodians and Vietnamese have told me at the highest level that any relief plane can come without conditions. At the time of our filming, 3 planes had come in 9 months. America and Europe hold most of the world's surplus food. We feed it to animals. In Britain, we are treated with penicillin as a matter of right. All of us who made this film have never seen anything like Cambodia today. The cries of children have followed us everywhere. There are 6 months to save a nation of mostly children. Is that impossible? Since this film was made, more relief has reached Cambodia from Vietnam, the Eastern Bloc countries, Australia, Britain's Oxfam, and some other Western charities, and the food situation has slightly improved. But throughout Cambodia, hunger and disease and trauma are widespread. 3 months ago, the Cambodian government requested 100,000 tons of emergency food. As of yesterday, the total Western aid sent through UNICEF and the Red Cross amounted to 1,300 tons of food. Effectively, that's almost nothing. And this situation is likely to continue as long as Western governments recognize and give international comfort to Pol Pot, the Asian Hitler. You can assume that most of the people you saw in tonight's film are now dead.